probably learned this weekend, my name is Amanda Farnell, and I'm the Operations Manager for the Saskatchewan Festival of Words, and this is Managing Artistic Director, Sarah Simpson. We are in Treaty 4 territory, the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect and honor the treaties that were made on all territories, and we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we are committed to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration.
Before the panel begins, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the staff here at the Moose Jaw Cultural Centre, Production Manager Eric LaFrance up top. Sales Manager Jennifer Warren, who you've seen running around in the Box Office Manager Janice Fowley, Community Outreach and Marketing Coordinator Tim Lemko, and Finance Clerk Wanda Reed. Plus, is Matt Fraze here this morning? Matt Fraze has been around doing sound for us this weekend and other contracted techs helping out. And finally, Jeremy Ratzlaff and Liam McCall from Lamp Black Productions, who've been doing videography and live streams and running around as much as we have. So thank you all. And now the people who are awkwardly waiting on stage with us here can start talking to each other. And here's Amanda Leduc for the first panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Amanda. And of course, thank you to all of you for being here with us today. I am so excited to speak with these four, these four writers today about their publishing journeys. Just as an introduction, you probably know all of them already, but in case you don't, we have, first of all, Suyi Davies Okungbowa. Suyi, raise your hand. Suyi is an award-winning author of fantasy and science fiction. His latest books include The Nameless Republic, epic fantasy trilogy, including Son of the Storm and Warrior of the Wind. He lives in Ontario, where he is a professor of creative writing at the University of Ottawa. Next, we have Jason Purcell. Jason, raise a hand. Jason is a writer from Treaty 6 territory, where they co-own Edmonton's Glass Bookshop. Swollening, their first collection of poetry, plays at the intersection of queerness and sickness. Next, we have Wayne Simpson, to my left. Wayne is an author and professional photographer based in Elora, Ontario. Determined to tell meaningful stories through portraiture, Wayne prides himself on being true to his subjects as he combines art and compassion together as one. Wayne's ultimate goal is to create images that evoke emotion and a sense of mystery. While his niche lies in portraiture and landscape photography, his versatility as a photographer carries into his commercial work and event photography, making his style distinctive in the industry. As an educator, Wayne conducts portrait and landscape photography workshops throughout Canada. And finally, last but not least, we have the luminous Cheng Thom. Kai is a writer, performer, lasagna lover, and wicked witch based in Toronto. She is the author of 5 award-winning books in various genres, including the children's book From the Stars in the Sky to the Fish in the Sea, which was featured on Julie's Library, a podcast hosted by Dame Julie Andrews. Kai Cheng is the winner of several literary awards, including the Stonewall Honor Book Award and the Publishing Triangle Award. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for being here today. So I wanted to start off, getting right at the heart of it, and I have a question for all of you. And my question is, now that you are all published authors, whether you've just published your first book or you've published several, I would like to know, how do you spend your millions of dollars? I mean, transparency is important in this business. It really is. So, anyone want to go at it? Do you swim in your coins like Scrooge McDuck?
I can go.
Go, Kai Cheng.
Mostly I lounge on my private island.
Oh, private island, I love it.
None of you are invited. I joke. If I had an island, I don't believe in land ownership, but also, you would be invited. But no, I mean, I love this question because I think what it calls me to say is like, that there are such different levels of like financial reward in publishing. And I mean, when I started out, I would do a reading or a performance for $50 to $150 per appearance. And that's really changed now that, like, mid-career, I guess, and now it's like somewhere, you know, somewhere between $200 and $500 an appearance, right? And sometimes much more for like a very kind of like well-funded thing. I think it's important to talk about numbers. There's so much discussion of that on Twitter now. And so it's really changed my life, I guess, that I also went from someone who like was in indie publishing and like I remain like devoted to indie publishing, but also have had a chance to start to work with a much bigger publisher now, and to experience like what it's like to get an advance that is, you know, actually allows me to take time off from my regular job. And so I guess I would say like, how do I spend my millions of dollars? Well, when I get them, I'll let you know. But how do I spend my more than a few $100s? It allows me to write more and to write more long form as well. So yeah, and I wish that that was better known across the industry, and that more people had the opportunity to get that kind of funding.
That is a lovely answer. It was actually a joke question, so you didn't have to answer, but no. I appreciate that because I was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I do think transparency is important here, and I think it is something that, especially when you're starting out, you don't, it's very easy to think that writing is very glamorous and you know, exciting and special, and it is exciting and special, but there are difficulties too, and it's a lot more difficult than I think, certainly when you're starting out, you think it might be. And I wanted to, you know, note that. But moving on from that, the difficulty question of it, I wonder if we could go a little broader and start off by talking about having each of you tell us a little about your latest published work, what kind of book it is, what the experience of publishing it was like for you. All four of you are writing in various different genres, and I'm curious to see what's been similar and different for each of you in your paths to publication. And Jason, I wondered if we could start with you.
Happily. So my debut collection, poetry collection, speaking of millions of dollars, this is the way to do it, is called Swollening, and it's published by Arsenal Pulp Press, who, you know, is an indie darling, and we share a relationship there.
Love
and,
Arsenal.
Truly love Arsenal, and I think that, you know, and I think about my path, yeah. Hi. Jillian over there, also Arsenal. When I think about my path to publication, I think about all of the people who have kind of held me and brought me there. So I published a chapbook with Anne Struthers Press in Toronto, and it was because my friend Joshua Whitehead came to a reading I did in Calgary, and then made a connection with Brian Lamb at Arsenal, and who then invited me to submit to them. And so, I mean, I think about all the ways in which I feel like I couldn't be where I am without the community already sort of believing and supporting me. And so, to me, that's what I think about when I think about how it is, I think any of us come to publish, is that it's conversational and it's community-based. And so, I mean, God knows where I'll go from here. Maybe they'll want me to do another, maybe they won't. But I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here among friends like you and to be part of this community. I mean, I think we're all part of it, and it's it makes so much possible.
Kai Cheng, what about you?
Yes, I mean, I just love your answer to that question, Jason. Can I steal it? And okay,
It's yours.
Thank you. No, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm really thinking about the community that it takes to produce a book. That my latest published work is not in my lap for some reason. I don't know. Anyway, my latest work is a children's book, a picture book called For Laika, the Dog Who Learned the Names of the Stars, also with Arsenal. They're so lovely. And a children's book particularly is a collaborative experience because one has an illustrator generally. And my illustrator, Kai-Yun Ching, also did my previous picture books illustrations. And it's just amazing to feel that relationship deepen. We've always talked about offering picture books as like a gift to community, particularly our friends who have children and to those children. So For Laika is this book about a dog who goes to space. And those of you who remember the real life Laika know that that story is a complicated one as well. I think that's what I love about the community of writers and publishers, like the publishing industry. At its best, it's an opportunity for community to give each other the gift of holding complex and beautiful stories.
Suyi, what about you?
Okay, let's see. I'd say in general, my journey was sort of, for each book had a different journey, each book that I've published, mostly because I've published them at different times, but also from different places. So my debut, for instance, I was living in Nigeria at the time when I sold that, and it was to a sort of medium-sized indie in the UK called Rebellion Publishing, and it was atraditional in its approach because they were having their first open submissions in like 10 years. And they were like, oh, we're just gonna throw our doors open to anyone who has something that they're working on that's complete. You don't need to have an agent or whatever. And so I was working on this thing that I was writing after work every day. I just like find a corner in the breakout room and just like tap away until the traffic cleared, and then I drive home or whatever. So that was pretty much what I used to do. I called it After 5 Shenanigans. I had this like novel that became my debut, which is David Mogul, God Hunter. I turned it into them and sort of forgot about it, but like 6 months or something down the line, they just came back and were like, hey, is this still available? We'd like to buy it. And so that's how I published the first one. And then the second one, which is the trilogy that starts with Son of the Storm, happened because the publisher wanted to buy another book, and I was already working on the trilogy like even before this other one. And by this time, I had moved to the US by then, I think, and they wanted to make an offer, but I was like, I don't have an agent. And they were like, oh, so get one. And so I took I sort of then pitched agents saying, oh, here, someone already wants to buy my book. All you just need is to come in and do the work or whatever. And so I pitched a few agents, got a couple of responses, and eventually landed an agent who then decided that they weren't going to sell it to that house because they could do better. And so they pitched it elsewhere in many other places, and we ended up selling to Hachette, which Orbit is the imprint under. So sold to Hachette in the US and Little Brown in the UK. And that was, so that started the journey of the trilogy, which is going to have a second book come out next year, 2023. And then in between, I've written a bunch of tie-in works for IP works for different properties like Marvel's Black Panther, Minecraft, the video game, and Stranger Things, the TV series. So those were completely different journeys because often what just happens is the publishing house and the property that they're working with just decide that they want a book about something, and they say, we want to write a book. So Stranger Things is a good example. They're like, we want to write a book that tells the story between seasons 3 and 4 for my book. And they're looking for someone who wants to do that. And as I was saying at the reading yesterday, at that time, I had literally told my agent, I was like, go out there and find me something. I just said, put out feelers. Anyone who's looking for someone to write something, I want to do it. And it just so happened that Netflix was looking for someone to write that for that property at the time. And they just said, all right, why not give it a shot? We did an interview-ish, and they eventually gave me the property to write the book for. Same thing happened with Minecraft, same thing happened with Black Panther, and yeah, so but those all only sort of happened because I was already like mid-career-ish. That's the way it tends to be. But yeah, so 3 different processes for these 3 books at different phases of the publishing journey.
That's great. And Wayne, finally, what about you?
Wow, this is educational for me, hearing all this, because I'm the newest author here, I think. And to be honest, I feel like I kind of snuck in the back door.
It's his first festival, everyone. Let's give him a hand.
On that note, I have to say this has been an amazing experience. Just everybody's been so supportive and patient, and all the questions I've had, so thank you all for that. Yeah, so my experience was, my publisher is Rocky Mountain Books. They're out of Vancouver. And I have a couple of friends that have published several photography books with them. And they kind of gave me a heads up that the publisher might have a slot. And so I found out that they had actually been watching my work on social media and been keeping an eye on it, and they were fans of my photography and knew a little bit of my writing. Writing only started maybe 5 years ago. And so I touched base with them, and basically it just happened. It was, yeah, again, I think I sort of cheated.
No, I love that variety in the stories, though, because things do happen that way, right? Sometimes you have books that you work really, really hard on, you know, and it's a real struggle to bring them out into the world. And then sometimes it's like the world, you know, the stars align, and there's just this cosmic path that opens up, and your book gets out into the world. So it's really lovely to hear about the different variety of stories, because I think a lot of people assume that there's like one path to publishing, and if you don't do certain things, or if you do certain things wrong, or if there's a wrong way of doing certain things, you're not going to get your book out there. And it's totally not true. I mean, we have, you know, 4 stories here of people who have books out in the world in a variety of different ways, which also leads to my next question. And Kai Cheng, this one's for you, because you've published in a variety of genres now. You have a children's book out, you've written a novel, you have a collection of essays that's coming out in 2023, I believe? Poetry, I'm sorry. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and what those experiences were like for you, and how publishing in different genres has been a different experience for each particular book?
Oh, I don't think anyone has ever asked me this question before, so I'm so delighted about it. Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, it is really different publishing in different genres. And my first love is, and will always be sci-fi and fantasy, which is funny because I don't have a sci-fi fantasy novel. I have like a fabulous magical realist novel. It's not quite the same. I think what really strikes me is like how different genres are marketed differently, and how that shapes the process all the way up to conceptualization. So, you know, when I was writing my first novel, I wrote it in a fit of rage because my first poetry manuscript had been rejected. So I was like, "Ah, I'll show you." And then I wrote this novel, and I was thinking that I was thinking a lot at the time about the new wave of transliterature, and which was coming out around 2013, 2016, and how I wanted to contribute to it. And because of what people were saying on social media, what they were saying on Twitter, what people were saying you know, at their own book talks, I really shaped my novel around that. Like what's missing from this conversation? What do I have that I really want to add to it? And that's how that book was born. And it came out so fast, I think because the stars did align kind of at that time, where I was like, I had my ear to the ground, I had an idea that was kind of fit, and then we were also in a moment where trans fiction was starting to become more ascendant, which is great. My poetry manuscript that got rejected took 10 years to publish. And I think that has a lot to do with like the idea of how, you know, of who wants to read poetry, And I had started writing that manuscript and was trying to sell it at a time when like diverse literature wasn't really on the radar of the Canadian literature scene. And I was writing so much about identity at the time. So that book just sort of like floated without a home. And then the moment did come. And then suddenly both the novel and the poetry book were out at the same time. And so I've always remembered that, how it's not necessarily the project itself, but also the way that the stars align, the way that people are talking about literature, the way the market is shaped, all these things have to come together for a book to be born.
That is great. Thank you so much. What are some myths about publishing that were dashed or perhaps reinforced for all of you when you published? Jason, can we start with you?
Sure. What comes to mind with this question is maybe it's not even a myth. I think that it's something that was true of publishing here for a long time, and that people in the room might identify with, is the ways in which regionalism has really defined what would be published for such a long time. And I think prairie writing has not gotten the attention or the opportunities that writing out of literary centers would have, so like Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal. Coming from Amiskawitch-Waskahigan, Treaty 6, Edmonton, Alberta, there are so many great prairie writers from that place. Settler writers, and of course, writers from those homelands, the Nehiyawak writers who are from there. That just wasn't getting the attention, right? It wasn't getting the published attention. I've seen friends of mine get emails back from agents or publishers saying, the story's good, but we can't sell it because there's too much Edmonton in it. And people in Toronto aren't going to want to read that. And I think for a long time that was the case. And it's probably true of writing from here too, right? Saskatchewan writing and writing from Manitoba, from Treaty 1. And I think that that's really changing now. And in writing this collection, I mean, of course, thinking of the market, poetry is sort of like, there is a market, but it's a real sort of and so I feel like I was able to write really closely about home. But I see that happening more and more in fiction. There are writers who have books out already or coming out very soon that are going to be very big books and that are taken up by real big publishers that are set in the prairies. And so I think that's something that maybe it wasn't a myth because it was the case, but I really see that changing, and I really felt that support from Arsenal Pulp to write about a place that has for a long time not been considered a literary place, even though it is, and like Moose Jaw is, and there's so much writing happening outside of these major centers. So that's what that question brings to mind for me.
That is so true. I live in Hamilton, which is a bigger city, but smaller compared to Toronto. And for a long time, there was that sense of like, oh, nothing literary happens here. I need to move somewhere else. And it definitely, absolutely is changing. Suyi, what about you? Myths about publishing, having a book out in the world. Obviously, one of those myths is you thought that airplanes would get you to where you needed to be for literary festivals on time.
I think for me it might have been the idea that if you write the best story, if you do the best, you tell the best story that you can tell, and you put your best into it, it means it's gonna be. I'm gonna use the word success, but also so that's gonna be a success. But I also found, I guess, that how success is measured, it differs in publishing as well, and who's measuring it. So the first thing is, if you write the best story, it will get requisite airplay, or there'll be many eyes on it. It will be published. It will get accolades or whatever. But I found that it's not really about the story. It's actually a lot about, surprisingly, the excitement within the house for the work. Mm-hmm. Not even the excitement in the bookstores. It's the excitement within the publishing house and how they decide they're going to put their energy behind the book. That's actually what gets books recognized in multiple forms in whatever way, awards or whatever. So a good example is that's why, say indies, right, who are very passionate about their books and would like put the as much of the energy they can behind the books, tend to get like a lot of devoted readership and fans, and even their authors are like very excited to be parts of the houses, as opposed to say sprawling conglomerates where books are moved through in like a conveyor belt of, and so you sort of start to get a sense of like how and why books, like why do I see the same book every time I open up, say, my Amazon page? Part of that reason is, or why do I hear about this book the whole time, right? All of that I started to realize is not about like if that's the best book or like it's the most well-written book. It's not. Very well-written books sometimes don't get any eyes, while books that are not at the same level as those ones get way more, eyes on them. The other thing is how success is measured, right? As an artist, you go into publishing like this idea that success is this thing. For some people it's awards, for some people it's sales, for some people it's the money, right? The kind of advance you get. But I guess the myth, or something I learned after the fact, was you kind of have to decide what success is for you before going in, because a lot of expectations will be dashed. And you sort of have to decide if whatever has been dashed is relevant or important to you as an author. Because publishing moves so quickly, decisions are made on your behalf that might not sit right with you and stuff like that. So you sort of have to decide what you're gonna just like walk past and move on to the next thing, or what's going to be like important that you need to sit on and fight for and things like that. So how you measure your success, how you measure is very important going in, and that's something that I did learn that was after the fact of being published. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for your candor and honesty about it. I think having honest conversations like this is really, really important. Wayne, this is your first book. What are some myths about publishing that you had in mind, or maybe didn't? Maybe.
I don't know if I would call them myths, but I guess my perception going into creating Resilient. My publisher, I think, at first thought it was going to be more of a picture book. And I just kept writing. And I guess it was kind of a surprise to me to find that it didn't really fit into any particular mold, and that it was able to be sort of this hybrid of a picture book and essays. And I think that was my biggest surprise, that they were totally open to that, and they just accepted it, and I just kept writing.
That's lovely. I mean, there are wonderful stories like that too, right? Where you just find yourself with a great creative team who really paves the way for you to just kind of shine in terms of what you want in your book. And so it's lovely to hear that was the experience for you. Kai Cheng?
Oh, I have two quick ones. And it really comes back to that $1 million thing. So when I was a child, I read a lot of like sort of those like big fiction series, right? Like the Babysitter's Club and the Animorphs and Goosebumps were like my jam. And so I thought that was the center of the literary world, which was wrong. And I had imagined myself being like, author of the Babysitter's Club or something, just like waking up and surrounded by riches and like adoring fans. They were gonna build a theme park for me. And even when my first novel came out, which was like with an indie publisher who were working out of their kitchen at the time, Autonomy Press, so wonderful, by the way. You must check out their work. But they were not, for some reason, able to secure me like an amusement park deal. And I was like, you mean I still have to work? And I'm sort of joking, but sort of not. Like, it does, there was like something in my mind about like, having achieved like a certain amount of recognition in mid-career, there was a part of me that was sort of hoping like, ooh, maybe I could like live a life of luxury, or at least like a life of not having another job. And I mean, I think it's a bit more complicated than that. As we know, lots of writers either have to maintain other careers or really have to work. the publishing industry, not just from the writing angle, but from teaching and performing and other kinds of things. My second myth is that I thought that all published writers were like some other kind of different being. Like I thought they were like elevated and that I was like an imposter, you know? Like I was like, oh, well, I'm gonna go in and they're all gonna be so beautiful and smart and I'm just me, but then it turned out they weren't all beautiful. No, I'm joking. No, they were human beings and like lovely to be with and sometimes irritating as well. And there was a whole, that of course we span the range of human experience and that being a writer in a writer's community is actually a lot like being in like a non-physical workplace. Like we're colleagues and we have relationships. And I think the lesson there for me is like cultivating those relationships in a good way is really important. And that's advice that I wish more young writers first publishing would get when they start out.
Yes, that is a great point, and it's one actually that I will return to a little later on in my questions. But Wayne, I wanted to go back to what you were talking about with your book and your experience around, working in photography and then bringing the writing into it. You mentioned earlier too that you've been writing for about 5 years now. And so what was it about, you primarily work in photography, and what was it that suddenly made you think, I need to add something to these portraits, I need a narrative to go along here. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. In the beginning, I was really just focused on the photography. And as time went on, I started to become more and more of a storyteller with my photographs. There came a point where I felt like I wasn't doing my subjects justice, really. I was not painting enough of a picture of them. And that just kind of prompted me to start writing. And over the 5 years, I started working on my writing and realizing that I was okay at it. And people started kind of commenting on how much impact the stories were having along with the photographs. So it just kind of blew my mind, the power that the images and the writing could have together.
And so did you have input, well, I guess you would have, in terms of the layout of the book? Because for those of us that work primarily in prose, it's not something that you get a chance to really, you can sort of sign off on it when they give you the layout of your book, but you don't get to say, I'd like to choose this font, I'd like to do this, in most cases. Did you have more control over that because of it being a visual medium?
Yeah, they were very accommodating. Mm-hmm. I actually come from a graphic design background, so
okay.
So that was helpful that I could collaborate with them, and they were very accepting and patient with me.
That just sounds so lovely. I hope all of your book experiences from now on are equally as wonderful.
I'm getting the sense that isn't always the case.
It could be for you, though. It could be. Sometimes it works out. Suyi, your novel is a fantasy novel, the first in a trilogy, as you mentioned. And it's wonderful. You should all buy it. You should buy all of their books. When I was reading it, I was frantically going toward the end and like hoping there were teasers, which sometimes they do in fantasy publishing. They publish a little excerpt from the next book. And I came in the process of doing that on your acknowledgements. And one of the things that you say at the beginning of your acknowledgements was, let me just see, I got the quote here, "To bring a book to life, it truly takes a village." And I love that, and we've been talking around this idea for pretty much this whole panel, this idea that, and this is something that has been mentioned in other panels this weekend, there's a traditional idea of writing as a very solitary occupation, but it is actually collaborative because you work with editors and all that sort of thing. But then when you get to the point of bringing a book out into the world, it very much becomes a community endeavor. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit and how having that community approach in mind has helped you in your development as a writer.
Yeah, because in the beginning, when you start creative work, right, you sort of are just thinking, you're in your own head, right? You come up with an idea in the shower or something. So most of the work you do alone, right, in front of the computer and all of that. And then the minute you you sell the book to a publisher, it stops being your own thing. It starts to exist, in the minds of multiple people at once. And sometimes that can be like, very discordant, for you to, deal with. But I know at least the first time it was, I had to get used to it. But after the first, it became easier. But it never gets any less strange. Especially like when people are like using the, sometimes I'm having like editorial chats with my editor, and she's just like listing off names from characters in the book. I'm like, who is that again? Yeah. Sometimes I forget, and she's like, oh, that's the one that did this thing. And I'm like, okay, if you say so. So yeah, sometimes it's two ways. On one hand, you're like, wow, I made that thing, and it sort of comes to life beyond your hands, beyond that screen, your computer screen. And especially with a trilogy, right? You already have the first book out, so like everyone knows characters now, and so the second book becomes almost like it's like half your creation, but half in service of like what already exists, right? So it's a very it's really, and this is just at the editorial stage, right? Which even becomes more collaborative when you're working on tie-in work, right? Work that's tied into an already existing property or media, right? And in such cases, sometimes it's not even like really, or it feels like you're in a writer's room sometimes with those kinds of work, because they're telling you stuff. I was giving an example yesterday at the reading where folks are like, with the meeting I had with like the Netflix writing team, they just like drew red lines all around the manuscript telling me, oh, that song wasn't out in 1985, so you can't have it in the book, or like that film wasn't out on VHS or something. Like they're just correcting things and telling you what can go. Oh, this character doesn't have so whatever thing, and therefore they can't have it in the book. So sometimes you're together like shaping the story, and that's just editorial. And then it moves from editorial to production. You're working with copy editors, you're working with graphic designers, with proofreaders. You're working with the cover artists sometimes, right? For my cover, for instance, I had to write like a brief of like 3 pages about the character that gets to appear on the front cover. Oh, these markings, so this clothing, this jewelry, stuff like that. You had to describe all of that stuff, and then you go back and forth with the artist. All of these things, and by the end, you've worked with like a huge team of people, right? You've worked with, so I really thought about it like that. And that's aside, that's aside the people in my house, like my family, who have to accommodate me when I'm like up at 1 a.m., typing frantically in front of the computer. And then sometimes my wife will be like, aren't you going to bed? I'll be like, just
3
this last
cheers
line.
for Suyi's long-suffering wife.
So in that way, it feels like that too. Or my mom, who will call me and say, so you're too busy to call, or what? And so in that way, it sort of takes that village. I'm like, so I think about all of that, and all of these people that sort of accommodate me, right? In order for me to produce this thing, that's how the book gets made. It's not just, sitting at a computer. So that's how I think about it.
And that's lovely, because it makes me think too about people who accommodate us all as we write our books. And then there's another level of that accommodation that continues once the book is out in the world, because your book goes out and, is suddenly at the mercy of people who are putting it out into the world, then at the mercy of people who are, for example, selling the book, which brings me to Jason. Jason, you work as a bookseller in addition to being an author yourself, which just is so fascinating, because that means you see every single part of the process. So on a personal end what it means to create a book and put it out into the world, go through that process, and then the final stage of the process, or like second to last final stage, where you're selling the book, you're putting it into people's hands. And there is, I don't know if everybody knows, but there is this horrifying thing that happens with books when they go out in the world, where if they've been in bookstores for a long enough time, and it's like however many months or years beyond publication, bookstores can actually return them to the publisher, which I didn't know when I published my first book. And when I found it out, I was absolutely horrified. And it's, just one of the many horrifying things that you discover about publishing. And you're like, okay, well, I'm in it now, and I want to keep doing this. So you just kind of have to suck it up and move it on. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that part of things. How does it feel to be in it on both sides, right? As a writer, as someone who also believes in the community once the books come out and really works to get them in the hands of people. What is your favorite part of things, and what do you see as most important for you in that work?
Oh my gosh. One thing I'll say first is that Glass Bookshop has an official policy that I put in place to not return books by friends.
Everybody get your books from Glass Bookshop now. Yay!
We never return your books. Any Arsenal book we keep forever, so it's not coming from us, is what I'm saying. Don't look at me. But I feel so fortunate to have been sort of, professionalized in all of these different aspects of the publishing industry. During my undergrad, which is in comparative literature, I worked at an Indigo, and I learned a lot from that, and I took a lot with me from that experience. And during my master's in English, I worked at a place called the Canadian Literature Centre at the University of Alberta, which is basically a research center, and it brings folks from around the world who study Canadian literature. And there's a huge group of researchers in Europe, for example, which was shocking to me, but it's in fact very true that in Spain and Germany and other countries like that, there's this huge interest in Canadian literature. So we would always be organizing conferences or flying writers to Edmonton. We've brought you a few times, and that's how we became friends. I'd fly Kai Cheng over to Edmonton and order too many soups at restaurants. And
They order a lot of soups.
soup baby. And so I had that experience, right, with literary event organizing. And then I worked briefly at New West Press, which is a publishing house, the oldest from Edmonton. And I read through the slush pile, and I did their finances, and I worked on their production. And now I own a bookstore, Glass Bookshop. And so I really have sort of learned a lot in almost every aspect of the publishing industry. And it's so hard to pick a favorite or a part that's most impactful because they're all such different parts of my brain and also my love of books. So I really loved getting to work with Jasmine Welsh, who is the designer at Arsenal, on the cover and the interior, because we had a meeting and it was mid-pandemic. I guess we're still mid-pandemic. And we were talking about what the cover needed to do functionally, and I was like, it needs to be a thumbnail. It needs to be something that is not just going to be seen on a table of a bookstore or a shelf, but it needs to be, if someone's scrolling through a website, it needs to be immediately clear what it is. And that was so fun and exciting because I was bringing my bookseller and publishing and writer sort of hats to the table. But I think the part that is most thrilling to me, probably intellectually and spiritually, was the editing process. I worked with Joshua Whitehead, who has sort of has just kind of carried me through, as I said earlier, just into this world, and has held me throughout. And when they asked me who I wanted to edit the book, I was like, Josh. There couldn't be anyone else. They're like, he's really busy, I don't know. But within a minute, he wrote back to me saying, I would love to take this on. And that was the most generative and beautiful part of this whole experience for me, because it's having somebody who cares so deeply for not only you as a person and as a writer, but also for the work. Meeting you there every session, every time you are coming up against something that's very difficult. He's there to say, meet me here. Come with me. You're not alone in this. It's not a solitary activity, as we keep gesturing toward, right? Everything is happening in communion with other people at every stage. But editing this with Josh and helping to sort of shape this collection into what it is and make sure that it was doing at a complete formal level what I wanted it to do, not just at the level of individual poems, but how this book would move. He understood. And so that, to me, I think was the most exciting part, was actually kind of getting to the mechanics of the book. And it was just such a gift that I will treasure forever.
That's really lovely, and it leads into my last question. we are pushing for time. We started a little bit late, so I'm going to just push it a little bit longer. And I did want to remind the audience that there is room for maybe 1 or 2 questions at the end. So if you do have a question about the publishing process, please stand up and shout it out after I have finished with my last question here. As we have been talking about and around during this entire panel, so much about writing and publishing today is about community. And I wonder, being a published author is really about being a part of a community and deciding how you want to contribute to that community and how you want to function within that community itself. Do you have any advice for writers who are maybe just starting out and trying to think about how they see themselves? And if you do, would you share it with us today so that people can take this advice back with them when they go out into the scary world? And remember that it's really not as scary as maybe I have made it out to be on stage today. It really is quite a lovely experience to have a book out in the world. And can we talk a little bit about that, the community of it?
Yeah, I think that something that's helped me tremendously have been events like this and being able to, in Edmonton we have a number of festivals like this and just being able to come out and meet people face to face and build those connections is so invaluable. But when you can't do that, the internet has also been such a gift to me. I mean, being able to maintain connection and build connection. I mean, Jillian Christmas over here, hello, I'm a super fan. And we've never been able to meet in person, and now here we are. And it's it's been such a, it opens you up to so much. And I think that what we've seen during the pandemic is that community can be built virtually, and I think now needs to be built into community. We need to sort of rely on these types of connections. So, as a writer, as a young writer, that was something that was so crucial for me, was being able to not only put work out, but also let folks know when their work impacts you, like your work. I'm able to tell you when it hits, and your work when it hits. And I'm sure all of you, have writers like that who you can reach out to. So to me, that has been instrumental.
Kai Cheng?
Already getting all emotional. Relationships. It's funny because I think that when we start to talk about the industry and the seamy underbelly of the publishing industry, there are kind of horrifying things. Like, they send your books back, sometimes they pulp the books, oh my God. But, I think something I want to think more about, I need to remind myself more about when giving advice, is also that the industry is really, really deeply full of kindness. Real love for literature, and a lot of love. And I'm always talking about love, blah, 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 love. But it's nothing but love that could actually put together a festival like this one. Or an indie publishing company that puts out one book a year, out of their own pockets, like my first press did for a while. It's there is this deep, deep relationship that forms around the importance of story, and we think that sometimes we can get sort of lost in the notion of the author as a solitary shining star, right? This hero's narrative of you made the thing and then you're out there and you're famous. But actually, there's all these other people, other authors, editors, publishers, marketers, organizers, booksellers, who are equally or more important in a lot of ways, who are giving that love to the creation of more books and the promotion of more stories. And when we fall back on that, and when we really remember it, and weave it into the writing and into the speaking and the performing and the talking that we do, I think it really changes the experience. So it would be lean into the love that is at the heart of this thing we call publishing.
Lean into the love. I love that. Suyi, what about you?
I'm sort of going to echo that, with the first thing being that one of the things I learned early on was that a lot of navigating community, especially when it comes to publishing, is 20% the writing and whatever, and 80% not being a jerk. And that has pretty much just been guiding principle is like 80% not being a jerk. And the second thing that I do want to mention specifically because, and this is particularly new to me, but it's new to me, so that's why it's kind of important, is librarians. Okay, I really love librarians because I didn't have a lot of access to libraries and librarians growing up. And so eventually when I did, and I started to see like how much of a role they played like in publishing, but often doesn't get like as touted as you would often hear about bookselling or the publishers themselves. So librarians are like really, really awesome, great. They are a big part of the ecosystem, and my love goes out to them every time. So if you're a librarian, hi. And overall, I think it's sort of like, it's an ecosystem, right? There's something that feeds into something that, all these parts, all these various moving parts are sort of complementing each other. And I think we may not always understand it, but just going in with that not understanding that everyone who's working in these spaces loves stories, they love books, they love they love the art, they love what they do, but it doesn't make it any less work for them. I'm talking about fellow artists down to booksellers or anyone. It doesn't make it any less work. It's still work, right? They still have to dress up in the morning and go to work. So I always keep that in the back of my mind that when they get frustrated, it's not because they love your book less or they love a book less or stories less. It's because it's still work. And I always keep that in the back of my mind. And so every time I'm interacting with people, like when my flights got delayed and I was sending messages to Amanda, I was like, she's just doing her job. She's probably, swamped as well, right? So I keep all those things at the back of my mind, and that's sort of, all of these sort of form how I navigate this ecosystem of publishing in general.
That's lovely. 80% not being a jerk. Remember. Wayne, what about you? I'm sure you have elements of being in the photography community as well, and bringing that to it.
Yeah, this is all pretty fresh in my mind, being very new. I think one thing that I've found extremely important and heartwarming has been the fact that it was so easy to find somebody to mentor me and help me along the way, somebody I could bounce ideas off. And in the process of writing my book, there were probably 4 different people that were just happy to help me and wanted to be involved and were just showing me all kinds of love and just helping me get to that end goal. And then things like this. To be honest, I didn't know that this existed. And this community and what I felt this last few days has just been a real eye-opener. It's been beautiful.
That's so lovely. Thank you all for these insights. It's just the richness here. Oh. So I will say one question. There, in the back.
This question is about, because it seems like to be a writer now, you really have to be engaged in social media, and I'm wondering how you reconcile that with the fact that social media is just so toxic and terrible. And when you hear about authors being harassed off Twitter, review bombed on Goodreads, how do you wade into that minefield?
That's a great question. Anyone want to take it?
I'll tell a quick story. There was yes, it's very hard on social media, and I wouldn't say it's required, but it is strongly encouraged for authors to be really engaged because it helps to sell and promote the work that, as we've said, there's a lot of people really riding on getting the book out there and selling it. I think there are choices. I think that as writers, we can choose to keep our personal lives relatively separate and engage in a more public way. That said, that's not going to prevent us from being pulled into some of the morass that is social media conflict. And I think that too is a question, it comes back to lean into the love for me. When I think about social media, when I'm at my best, which is not that often, I'm thinking about but who do I want to be on social media given that it is a morass? And what do I want to give to other writers and publishers, other people in the community as a person on social media? And so if we come in with that and we offer something that is different, then I think we start to shift the ecosystem. There was a writer I was speaking to whose debut novel came out, and there was kind of a kerfuffle over it. There was a bit of a Goodreads review bomb and stuff. And I thought about it a lot. I was like, should I get engaged or not? Ugh. And then I thought, no, I really want to. And so I made some posts about, like, people can dislike your work always. But if we think about each author, particularly marginalized authors, as precious, as people we can't afford to lose, even as we disagree with what they've written, then how does that change how we critique them? And I think that if more of us in the industry, and more of you who are reading too, like if we leaned into love and also into courage and put that message or similar ones out there, then maybe we can have an effect on how social media is for writers, and that's what I hope for.
And to the world as well, right? Lean into love and have courage. And I think those are great words to end this panel on today. So thank you so much, Jason, Kai-Cheng, Suyi, Wayne, for joining us today and for sharing your wisdom and your grace. It's been such a pleasure to share this space with you. Thank you all for joining us. I am sorry about going over time. Amanda and Sarah, please have me back.
Thank you, Amanda, for hosting. Such good questions.
And there is one more panel after this, so please do join us again for Between the Sheets with Zarqa Nawaz, Katherena Vermette, and Will Ferguson. Will be very, very enjoyable. We will be back shortly. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, for joining us for the last panel of the day and the last panel of the festival. Just a quick housekeeping note before I do the introductions. Apparently, the highway is closed.
What?
So if you need to get to Regina, Amanda was saying that you can take the grid roads. But yes, there are some significant delays. So just keep that in mind. There is a hand at the back.
Gotta go.
Do you need?
I came in from Regina this morning, and it was a 40-minute round trip through the grid roads detour.
Oh, okay.
So just so you know.
All right. All right.
No.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you again for being here. I am excited to introduce you to our last panelists of the festival. We are here today with two panelists. Zarqa Nawaz, unfortunately, couldn't be with us this afternoon, but we will have a wonderful conversation nonetheless, I am sure. So pleased to introduce Katherena Vermette, who is a Red River Métis Michif writer from Treaty 1 territory, the heart of the Métis Nation. She received the Governor General's Literary Award for Poetry for her first book, North End Love Songs. Her second novel, The Strangers, won the Atwood Gibson Writers' Trust Fiction Prize and was named Chapters Indigo's Book of the Year in 2021. It was also longlisted for the Giller Prize. She is also the author of The Break. And finally, we have Will Ferguson. Will is a 3-time winner of the Leacock Medal for Humor, which includes one for beauty tips from Moose Jaw. His novel, there we go. His novel 419 won the 2012 Giller Prize, and his most recent novel, The Finder, received the 2021 Arthur Ellis Award for crime writing, and he lives in Calgary. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here with me today. So this panel is called Between the Sheets, and it is focused on the relationship between authors and fans, authors and book lovers. And to give us a little bit of grounding, I wondered if we could start by having each of you talk a little bit about your most recent book, and sort of situate this book and where it sits in your writing career at present. Is your latest book fiction or nonfiction or otherwise, and how has that marked a departure or a continuation from the work that you've done before? Katherena, can we start with you?
Me. Oh, it's on. Good. My latest book is called The Strangers. It is a family saga of a novel. It is my second novel. It is my, I don't know how many books. I also have 2 books of poetry and some children's books. So it feels like I'm no longer emerging. I've emerged. I don't know where I am. I don't think I'm mid-career yet. I feel still like I'm getting started, but I feel like I know more than I did before. I'm learning, but I also feel like I've been around for a while now. Yeah. So
there's a weird thing that happens with writing time where you still sort of feel like a bit of an imposter, even the farther along you get. Will, what about you?
My latest book is called The Finder. It's kind of a thriller, I guess. It's based on lost objects and a very dark, kind of amoral character who's hunting these lost objects, all real objects that are valuable not because they're of their inherent worth, but because they were lost. So Buddy Holly's glasses from the plane crash, or Muhammad Ali's gold medal, which he threw in the Ohio River. And it starts in southern Japan in Okinawa, on the island of Hateruma, and then it goes to Christchurch, New Zealand, and then to the outback of Australia. And it's based on my own travel writing. I was a travel writer for many, many years. So this is kind of my farewell to travel writing, in a sense. So it drew on some of my favorite places. And although the main character is a burnt-out, middle-aged travel writer. So you don't know where these ideas come from characters. They're just, I don't know where it's so intangible. Anyway, but his life is a lot more violent and a lot more interesting than my travel assignments were.
So Will, you've written in a lot of different genres. You were a travel writer, you work as a novelist, and you've also won the Stephen Leacock Medal for Humor, so you've done humor writing. Have you noticed a difference in how your fans or your readers approach your different writing? Like, there definitely are cases where readers who really love something that a particular writer puts out, may not love if they try something new or if they try to write in a different genre, or maybe they're falling over themselves with how wonderful they like the shifts and the changes. Can you talk a little bit about that, and have you seen it differently with different books that you put out into the world?
Well, certainly my publishers are not happy with me changing genres. People make it sound as though there's always resistance when I went from travel to nonfiction to fiction. So the publishers would much rather you stay in your lane. But I do find that there seems to be people who say, I really like your nonfiction, but your fiction is just too dense. I don't like it. Or I like your fiction, but your nonfiction is silly and trite. And they're both correct. both are correct. But this panel assumes that we have fans. Like, I just want to say that. So I have readers who like to point out mistakes in my books. I don't know if that's what you call fans, but and I was thinking about this, the difference between readers and fans, and if they're interchangeable. And I think from my how I look at it is, I would think a reader is reading the books. So if they read a book about Northern Ireland or a travel book, they're interested in that subject, that book. Or if they read a thriller, they like that thriller, or they like that genre. Or if they read your poetry, they like it, they enjoy poetry. So I think readers read for the books. I think fans are reading for the author. So the trick is to bring your fans from one genre to the other, and that's always the challenge.
That's a really good point, a really good distinction. I think there is a thing too that's happening now, and I don't know if it was maybe has been exacerbated by the pandemic and people taking in a lot of visual content and maybe feeling a lot of ownership of like the television shows that we watch and the kinds of, the fandoms that you get in places like Star Wars or Star Trek or things like that. There is some of it, maybe not as much in Canada, but I feel there is some of it certainly in the States, where authors, are sometimes peer pressured to, approach their stories a certain way or write about things in a certain way from their readers, from their fans. And it is an interesting development that feels strange in certain ways. Katherena, what about you? Because you've written a graphic novel, you've written some children's books, you've also written novels. How has your relationship with readers changed because especially with the children's books, right? Obviously, interacting with children readers is different than interacting with adult ones, or maybe they're exactly the same.
They're kind of the same. Adults tend to sit down a little bit more, or stay sitting down. Anyway, hopefully. But it also, I was really worried about that at first when I first came out, because I had a poetry book out, and then I did my children's picture book series. And so I really I thought I had to make those distinctions between okay, don't pick up my poetry book, little children, it's for grown-ups or whatever. But readers are really astute. And readers know what they like. And readers do not waste time on things they don't like. So I hope not anyway. I certainly have felt that some people have come along with me. And some people just know me from one thing or another. And even the other day, we were in the bookstore and someone was surprised that these picture books belonged to me, because they knew me as a novelist and didn't know me as a children's picture book writer, but they knew the picture book, which is the point. So that was great. So it's kind of disconnected in that way, but it's also I feel like it all comes from the same source. I always kind of seem to talk about the same themes. It's just in a different costume,
Do either of you have a preference for one costume over the other? Is your home in novels or in travel writing or in humor writing? Or is it just depends on the time, depends on the day, depends on the particular story and the vehicle that story needs to find itself in?
Well, I think, like I said, I love travel writing. That's what I began as. My dad one of the only good pieces of advice he gave, absent father, was if you can figure out what you love to do, and then figure out a way to get someone else to pay you to do that. And so I love being a travel writer. So I just wanted to travel. I wanted to write. But as I get older and older, I just find travel writing is a young person's game. I don't have the heart for it anymore. And so I finally relinquished a contract for a travel memoir because I thought I still love traveling, but to go there and really immerse yourself and write all about it, I don't have. So I've shifted to fiction. I love both of them, but my first love, and I don't know, maybe Katherena feels the same way. Your first love is always the most intense. So yours, I'm guessing with poetry, but with mine, travel writing is still my first love.
It is. It's always that first love. And for me, my home is definitely poetry. And I think that everything else I write is in some way poetry, at least at its beginning. And then it kind of gravitates to another way. Children's picture books is just a poem, really. They're all poems, you know. And graphic novels are the same because they're very, very visual. So your poems are visual, you know. And I have made the argument that my novels are just really long, wandering poems because I seem to be really comfortable. But I've learned how to put plot in there. You know, for a long time I wrote really bad short stories because there was no plot. I just wanted everyone to hang out and drink tea. But it's funny you bring that up. I got similar advice of, you know, find what you love and then figure out a way to make money for it. But mine was from Oprah.
From Oprah. Well, I don't know Oprah, so I just had to rely on my dad.
Oh, no, it was Oprah TV show in the 90s. Come on.
I'm curious about something, Katherena. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
I came to fiction from nonfiction, and you came to fiction through poetry. And many years ago, my very first novel, I toured with a poet, Anne Simpson, who's won the Governor General's, and she had written her first novel, Canterbury Beach. So she and I were both touring together with the same publisher. And we talked about the difference, because I found fiction really freeing after nonfiction. You could just if you didn't know a fact, you could fluff it or make it up. She found it much more restrictive. She came from poetry, and she had found, so we both wrote a novel, but I found it freeing and she found it restrictive. So I'm wondering, coming from poetry, did you find that as well?
It is restrictive. It is, you have to be a little more conscious of the reader, I think. Poetry is very, you get to hang out with yourself a little bit. You know, you get to kind of hang out with the image, but with fiction, you have to sometimes do these things to guide the reader. You have to be mindful of the reader. You have to tell people where people are and what's going on, and not just like get lost in the image of something like a bird with a shiny thing. So in that way, it was a lot more. I was a lot more conscious of conversing and participating in the conversation, whereas poetry feels very much my own thing. You know?
But you didn't find it frustrating?
It's all frustrating.
I remember Anne saying how frustrating it was.
Yeah.
That's all she said.
It's all frustrating. At some point, there's always frustration.
Shh, don't tell them. They think novels fall from the sky.
They do.
I love that sense of being in conversation with the reader, both as you're writing the book, but then also when the book comes out into the world, because, you know, part of writing a book is going out into the world and promoting it and literally being in conversation with your readers. And there's a big difference, right? I've been talking a lot this whole weekend about the collaborative process of writing and that sort of thing. But and even though it is collaborative, there is still a big difference, right, between switching from writing mode to switching to public author mode, where you're talking about the things that you've done and interfacing with readers. And, you know, this involves engaging with real people instead of fake ones that you make up in your head. And some writers are more gregarious than others and take to the promo side of things really well. And others, you know, it's maybe not their first love or they're not their first space. And I wonder for both of you, you know, what have you found easy or difficult about the promotional side of the book? Like interfacing with readers face-to-face or online. And, you know, doing the circuit, going to festivals, going to different conferences and things like that. What are some highlights and lowlights for you in that journey?
It's like I thought I was yakking before. I guess I've lost track of who's
I
right.
don't know who's who. I just didn't
well,
want to go first.
I wrote I've mentioned people pointing out errors. So can I quickly, I'll tell too quickly
Yes.
to explain my relationship with my readers, my fans. I wrote a book an early book called Spanish Fly. It was set in the Depression. And it was a 19-year-old boy who gets caught up with a pair of con artists, Virgil and Miss Rose, and they kind of seduce him on the road. And in the novel, it's written first person. It's in his voice. He's watching newsreels, what's happening in Europe with the rise of Nazism and this dark cloud that's spreading. And he's haunted by the image of burning books, of books that are prohibited, books that are banned. And he writes, and the burning, he figures, because when you start burning books, soon enough you'll be burning people. And he mentions that they were burning Jewish churches, okay? So my editor flagged this and said, you should really say synagogue. And I said, no, because a 19-year-old boy in the Bible Belt of 1930 doesn't know they're synagogues. He'll call them churches. And then the copy editor flagged it. I said, no, I know, they know it's... And then the proofreader flagged it. Every step of the way, I was like, no. I'm surprised the typesetter didn't go, wait. So I thought, no, this is in his voice.
Yeah.
And I know readers are astute, but my first event for that book, first Q&A, first question, a woman got up and she said, not really a question, more of a comment, which is always, right? That's a flag. When someone goes, I'm not really a question, this is more of a comment, right? That's you go, oh no. And she said, just so you know, it's not churches, it's Jewish synagogue. She thought I was so dumb that I was like, well, you're telling me Jewish people don't go to church? That's weird. So she thought I was so dumb that I didn't know that. And I'll quickly give another illustration of this. Because you think this is an anomaly. Well, no, this happens to me regularly. And I don't know what kind of readers or fans I'm drawing, but they're very pedantic. And I had a novel that started, and I'll get through the story quick because I don't want to use up too much time, but it began with a car going over an embankment and a fellow dying. So that's how it begins, with a car crash. And you think it's an accident, but it turns out there's more to it than that. And so I don't know anything about that area. So I arranged a ride-along with the Calgary the collision investigators. So these guys are amazing. They go to an accident, and they unwrap it, and they walk back in time, and they try to find out what was the point of no return. At what point did the accident, was it now inevitable? So you're asking what's responsible and who, if anyone, is responsible. Is there criminal negligence? Is it vehicular homicide? Is it suicide? And suicide by vehicle is more common than I realized. So they're totally grounded in empirical facts. They're totally grounded. And they asked me, okay, so where was the accident? And I was still outlining the novel. So I said, I don't know, maybe like a lonely road with a single pine tree and the moon. And they're like, no. Where did the accident happen? I said, perhaps the outskirts of a forlorn town. And they're like, no, the address on a GPS, point us where the accident happened. So we had to go find the place to kill someone. We had to drive and find a place that a car would, and I was recording them. Because I'm a really slow typist. I type with 3 fingers. I can't touch type. And every now and then, you ever hit the cap lock and you look up and you're shouting, you're like, oh no.
Yeah.
So my neighbor made the fatal mistake of telling me one time that she types like 95 words a minute. I was like, do ya? So I now dump all my tapes on her, and she transcribes. I pay her, but she transcribes my notes for me. Anyway, in the novel, this is 419. So this, in the opening chapter, the police find this accident, and they say it's an older fellow. He's retired. Because I'd asked the police officers, what would an older man, retired school teacher, what would he be driving? Because I don't know anything about cars. And in the novel, you can still find this, it says, he was driving a Pontiac Oldsmobile. This is, I hate this. Half the audience laughs, and the other half goes, what? That sounds like a thing, right? So Amanda was like, what? And you laughed, and Amanda went like, sounds right? Sounds like a
legit.
thing. Turns out there's no such thing as a Pontiac. It's like saying a Toyota Honda.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know. So my first reading, and the fellow in the back gets up, and he goes, first 5 pages, there's already a mistake in your book. There's no such thing as a Pontiac Oldsmobile. And I'm like, excuse me, sir, that's directly from traffic investigators. And he goes, And he goes, well, they're wrong. And I'm like, I don't think so. I think they know more about cars than you do, buddy. And so, just sit your ass down, man. Like this, he kept bringing it up. And so I went back, I was so mad. I went back to the transcripts, and there it is. I asked him, what type of car would an older fellow be driving? And the police officer says, a Pontiac Oldsmobile. I'm like, but then I thought, maybe I should go listen to the tapes. So I go back, there's a comma missing. What he says was, Pontiac Oldsmobile. So it's since been fixed. It's since been fixed in the paperback. So if you ever find the hardcover, that's a collector's item. You should probably buy lots of them. But what I wanted, the point of that is afterwards I was standing there and I saw the same guy coming towards me in the line. I'm like, oh, I'm not in the mood, buddy. I'm not in the mood. And he gets there and he goes, great talk, big fan. And then he leaves. So that's my fan right there. That guy who stood up and called me out on my ignorance, because I don't know anything about cars. And on an interesting note, we talk about gender assumptions, but it goes both ways. Because for that to get in print, my editor, my copy editor, my proofreaders are all women, and it turned out every one of them assumed, because I'm a dude, that I knew about cars. No one caught that. Not one person, that went right to print. And I said, why didn't you tell me? And I said, well, we just thought it's cars, you'll know. They said, you look like the kind of guy who knows a lot about cars. I'm like, I don't know nothing about cars. So anyway, so that's my interaction with fans and sort of taking up.
No, take up as much time as you want. Interaction with fans. I like it. I mean, I've had some negative, weird experiences that have, led me to certain decisions that for my own mental health. But I really do. Like this weekend, we've all been in love with being at a festival again and talking with each other and going to dinners. And what you don't get on Zoom is the backstage and the camaraderie and the signing of the books and the meeting of people. And I'm always amazed at the conversation. And I'm always like, this is my time when I'm on. So I do regard this as such an important and vital part of the work. And I am always willing to answer any question, because I do understand that there's always questions and receive comments. Mine, like I write very true to voice. I believe in true to voice. I fight for true to voice. Me and my copy editors and proofreaders have lots of arguments about how because it's when you're writing true to voice and my characters are not necessarily educated, or a lot of them really love the F-bomb, and I'm coming from poetry, so I want to structure things a certain way, and I'm very deliberate with that. And then I inevitably get, well, this is not grammatically correct. I'm like, well, she's a 16-year-old incarcerated youth. She doesn't give a fuck if it's grammatically correct. And this is how she talks. So we have those conversations. Also, I'm a bit of a grammar nerd also, so I also understand that grammar has different rules in different ways, and we shouldn't be so esoteric about this or so elitist about this. We have to open this up a little bit. So we have my copy editors, I get a different one every time. I have no idea why. But it is difficult. But inevitably, in the reader, I get a lot of, for some reason, it's retired school teachers. And I think it's something of that, and I admire school teachers. I love school teachers. I was married to a school teacher for a very long time. I was, a school teacher for a brief time. So I say this with love. But it's like they're retired and they just can't stop. I've had my whole manuscript of The Break emailed to my manager with all of the corrections in it. And I mean, thank you. But wow, that was a commitment to the point that they were trying to make, and I commend that. And I'm sure there are tons of mistakes. I'm a very messy writer, so I know there's tons of mistakes. And I'm so blessed to have a copy editor and proofreader and lots of eyes on it, and we all still miss stuff. Because typos are like bugs, they're everywhere, even when you can't see them. And when you open up that first book that you love and you're like, oh, look at that first book, you open it up, the first thing you're gonna see is a typo. Yeah. First thing. Yeah.
So I shouldn't feel bad about Jewish
No.
churches. Like
No, Jewish churches,
No
no.
one's done that to me, so I should really not complain about that one thing. So
Oh, no, it's just, yeah, it's...
I killed a retired school teacher at the beginning of my novel, if that makes you feel better. Yeah,
Well, I
killed
love retired school. They're doing the work of God. For free.
My dad was a retired school teacher, so I don't know what psychology is going on there.
I love/hate that idea of, because it's true, once a book is out in the world, you don't have ownership of it anymore, right, as the writer. It is something that you made and put out into the world, but readers will come to it with their own expectations, and they will build their own relationship to it, right? And they will have, it often speaks to how close a reader feels to the story, right? So they feel obligated to point out mistakes because for whatever reason, it punctured the illusion for them sometimes.
Yep,
And
takes 'em out. I get it.
that as you say, there has to be a certain amount of respect in there for that. But I do also find it interesting, especially in the age of social media now, because it's like readers no longer, you're no longer confined to a literary festival or an opportunity to meet an author in person in which to, air your grievances with their book. Readers can now do it all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on social media, if an author chooses to be on social media in that way. And so the writing world, I feel for many, has changed a lot in the last decade as a result of social media. And I wonder, as writers, we're not required, but you're often, gently, very, very gently encouraged by your publishers to participate in social media in some way as a way of building readers and nurturing a relationship with your readers. And I wonder if we could talk a little bit about how you may or may not see yourself in that space, and how engaging with social media in the sort of new sense of the phrase, but then also in the traditional sense of the phrase of, the social media that once was, where you were physically out in the world interacting with authors in the way that we do here. How does that help or hinder your path as a writer? Because it happens on both ends, right? Like, it can actually be quite useful when readers point out mistakes and you can be like, okay, I won't do that again, thank you very much, moving on. And it also can be quite painful and hard.
Well, I've been at it a long time. My first book was published in 1997. So that was pre-internet, really. There was rudimentary. I'd heard of this thing called electronic mail. But it was a very different beast, and it really was. So 97, and I wrote my first book was titled Why I Hate Canadians. So imagine today on social media what I would have been dealing with. And at that time, I mocked the Queen, and back then people had to physically, you got hate mail. You still got hate mail, but they had to physically write it out, and it was very articulate. They couldn't just go like, you suck, you asshole. Like, they couldn't just send you a letter. Dear William, you suck, So they were always long. So I have a big file of, and it's kind of sad. They've just diminished, and now they're pretty well gone. But
and there's a real dedication there too, because they have to pay for the postage to send their hate mail.
Physically write it out.
And then take it to the post office.
And then, so it was more thoughtful. But no, I'm not on any social media at all. Just not as a political stance. I'm just really lazy, and I'd rather, if I'm going to write, like, writing is such a chore, not a chore, but like I spend enough time on my screen already, because I write a lot and I'm doing this, and so I'm not on. And one time I did this talk in my son's high school, and I said, I didn't know all the names of social media really well at that time. I said, I'm not on Facebook or Twitter, and I was trying to say TikTok. I said, or Tinder, or any of those. So I didn't know. Now I know you swipe, right? You're swiping, so I get it. And one of the things, my publisher used to say, Will, you got to get on social media. Then they'd go out for a beer with me, and they'd say, Will, don't ever go on social media. Don't ever go on Twitter. Like, if I tried to go on Twitter, they would block me, I'm sure. So I'm not on any of the social media, but what was it? Anyway, so there was something that slipped my mind there, in that I'm getting old and foggy. But with social media, I think it's a generational thing too. Like, I don't take it as seriously. I know young authors are just so intensely engaged with trolls, really. I'm like, why are you engaged on any of that? Like, I didn't know, like, I just found out about Goodreads with my last book. So Simon Schuster called me up and they said, Will, you really should update your Goodreads bio. That sounded like you better mumbo jumbo to the rhubarb patch. Like, I didn't know what, I was like, I looked at them and I said, and there was a long pause, and they said, you got to update your Goodreads bio. That's what, and I looked at her and I was like, I said, do you want us to do it? I'm like, yeah, you go ahead. You do it, and then I'll see if you did it properly. So I didn't know about Goodreads. I didn't know it existed. Now it's like all these reviews. I love Goodreads because if they're 1 star, I'm like, fool. If they're 5 stars, you're correct. Do you know what I mean? Like, we just pick and choose. But I just wanted to quickly say that I've with Shoe on the Roof, this is how out of step I am. The character was a young character. He was a young medical student. He had to be young for reasons of the story. He was in medical school, and he does this really ill-advised psychological experiment with 3 mental patients, which he should not have done. My mom was a psych nurse at Weyburn in the 1950s with Dr. Humphrey Osmond and the LSD experiments. So I knew about these horrific experiments, but it was set in today. And I am a fine arts major, so I assumed that anyone smart enough in med school has got it together. Like, they're really, so he's a player. He's different women in that. And I've heard from so many med students go, no, med students are not. And he actually goes, this is something from the 80s that a friend of mine did. He goes to the travel section of bookstores, and he looks for kind of lonely moms who've dropped their kids off. He goes there, and he watches them walk through the travel guide section. And then he meets them. If they linger at Venice, I mean, he's an awful guy. I'm not saying this is a good thing, but I got so many comments, people saying, and I just got away with this because they said, I like how he's old school picking up women. I'm like, what do you mean? Because he's an awful character. He's redeemed, but he's a kind of an awful, narcissistic, young med student. And so many people said, I like that it was old school because now he would just, that's how I learned about swiping. So I did not, they said, now we'd be swiping right or left. I'm like, yeah, I did that intentionally. So the only reason I got away with it is because people thought it was a quirk, a character quirk, but it wasn't. I did not know what it means to be a young person on the prowl, to be a young single person. I didn't know how it worked. So my references, fortunately I got away with it, but I'm done with that. I'm done with social media or young characters. My characters are all my age now. I don't do any, anyway.
It's a good way to get out of that.
So are you on Tinder? I mean TikTok, or whatever the latest thing is.
Whatever the thing is. Yeah, this might be the wrong panel to ask that question because I'm not on anything either. I mean, I was originally, and like when I was pre-published, I spent years doing poetry shows and making gigs and making events and stuff like that in Winnipeg, and I had a great time doing that. And then I was on Facebook and actually quite active and always promoting everybody's stuff. But it came actually right before the break was released. I just had some personal things that were happening, and I had to really just get off Facebook. And I got nothing but support, which I was really surprised at because I thought it was just about, this book was just about to be released, and I thought I was supposed to be this thing. And I think that's part of the reason why I just really wanted to get the fuck out. Because it's that switch to that professional voice that I just wasn't comfortable with. I love promoting other people, but promoting myself, I'm suddenly like crickets. But I was really supportive, and I know my manager suggested maybe getting one of those social media persons, and you can get these people, you know, this is the secret of celebrities, right? They don't actually like everything. They don't spend all their time on social media. They have people who do that. Not everybody, but a lot of people do. And I found that really insincere for me because, like, I think it can be such a great communication and can be such a great way to reach out to people. So I didn't want people thinking whomever somewhere was me, and it wasn't me. So I chose not to go on anything. I was still on Twitter, but I was never active on Twitter. I just retweeted things. But I was really glad that everyone around me was supportive of that professionally. I'm also very privileged in that I have other people doing that for me. Like, I have publishing houses and managers and people that do that for me. So I'm able to not have to do that because I found it when I went off Facebook originally, it was only supposed to be for that book tour, which is the wrong time to take a social media break. But it did so much for my brain You know, I really just don't function that way. And I'm still, I try to engage in other ways, and my publishers know that. I'm always good to travel. I'm always good to do Zoom presentations. If you invite me somewhere, I will more than likely be there if I can. I really try to engage in other ways. For a lot of Intel, this year I had like a contact form on my website where you could, like, you're literally getting in touch with me. Now I still have that through people. So I am still reachable. I do still make community events a priority. I make, you know, fan mail or, you know, pointing out my typos email a priority. I like to respond. But yeah, it's not necessary. I do think a lot of people are stepping away from social media. I do think there's other ways to engage. I choose to engage as the old auntie who will just send you emails. You know, whenever someone wins an award and stuff like that and they're all over social media, I'm sending emails to their Yahoo account going like, this is the only email I have, yay! And the young people never respond because they never check their Yahoo account. Yeah.
Can I ask about or mention about book clubs?
Book
Because you get
clubs.
invited, and because book clubs are really, you talk about I don't know if grassroots is the right word, but they're really local community events. And so sometimes you get invited to book clubs. And so two things, if you invite an author to book club, let them eat, okay? Because everybody has lots of food and you're sitting there going like, and like you just grab a nacho or something. And then the best book club I ever went to was my mother at my son's school. They're all Indo women. And they invited, they just fed me curry for like 2 hours and then had a book club. But I did one, CBC wanted to surprise a book club. So don't do this, don't ever do this. Because one of the producers had a book club and they were doing my book, whatever the novel was at the time. I can't remember. I think it might have been Shoe in the Roof. But they said, we're gonna surprise them. So in the middle, they're gonna come with the CBC. And I came in right when one of the women was just trashing the book. Like she had just finished, not on air, she didn't know. And it was so awkward. All the other women were so mean, they go ahead, Trish, what were you saying? She's like, no, she's looking. So it's like social media showing up and someone's like, this novel. So do you go to book clubs? Like do you get invited, and if so, do you go?
I do get invited. I can't do a lot of them. I do, yeah. I try to, sometimes I'll get sent questions and I'll respond to them kind of thing if I'm able to.
But if it's someone who you know, right? It's hard
If it's
like a
someone who I
relative.
know, and it also depends on, I do make indigenous groups, BIPOC groups, marginalized persons. I try to prioritize those. So if it's like, like I recently did, the UBC has an anti-racism book club. I was able to do that. I did something with one of my local organizations with women who were at risk in some way. So I do try to do that, but unfortunately I don't. I
feel bad because I often say no.
Yeah, well, sometimes you have to say no. I mean, you really, and again, that comes back to, I think this is a COVID thing, that we're really prioritizing our mental health is okay, and I think it wasn't always okay, but I think now it's become more and more normal. And this is one of the ways the young people are really leading us and really giving names to these things. And I love this work, but saying no is okay.
I noticed that because of COVID. The reason I asked is because it's going to be coming back now. But I'm guessing book clubs are going to start returning as people are vaccinated and do tests and stuff. So I did.
And maybe they'll feed you next time.
Well, I hope, please, if you have an author, give them a moment for the author to eat, because they always have lots of food, but then they're like, we wanted to ask you something. So you sit on the couch, and they all go around and ask a question. And when they're not asking the question, they run off and eat great food and then come back to the living room. So I find it really hard because it's my kids' teachers often. It's or friends of friends. I find it really hard to not go to say no to that.
Yeah, it is hard.
It is
It's a
hard.
skill. It's a skill to learn.
I got invited to a book club in Woody Point. Have you been to the Woody Point Writers Festival?
No, I only
Go.
been online.
It's so fun. Anyway,
hear that.
and there's a book club. They're going to invite you. You say yes because it's a really small town. And I said, oh, I'm really busy, da 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 da. Then I parked at Gross Morn. I took a taxi out to go hiking, and then I did this hike, and then my phone wasn't working. I was like stuck, and I had an event that evening. I was like it's in Newfoundland, up by Corner Brook. And this is like something, if you put this in a film, they would say, no, Katherena. And I was out there, was an empty road, and one car is coming. So I go, and they pull me, go, oh, I get in, hi. I'm going, yeah, we're the book club that invited you that you said no to. So the woman, they were on their way to the book club that I had said no to for my novel. So I sat in the back going, they said, so you're busy that day? Like, yeah. And then they see you around. So if you get invited, say yes.
Say yes.
Or at least don't flag them down. Flag them down.
At least don't get, like, at least stay in your hotel room.
Yeah, that's right,
And
just
hide,
hide.
like you're supposed to.
So for each of you, you've each experienced various elements of what I'll call CanLit institutions. We have the Giller, Canada Reads, Zarqa, even though she's not here, has experienced the hallowed halls of the CBC and television programming and all that. And so I wonder, have those experiences shaped the way that readers in particular interact with you and view you in Canada?
Yeah. I mean, my first book of poetry was released in September 2012. Local publisher in Winnipeg, Muses Company. There was 300 printed. 300 were printed. And it was a full year before I was nominated for the GG. A full year and 13 months. And we did not sell out of our 300. I did one trip, and it was to Edmonton. I was so excited to do this Edmonton trip, and it was just to do a poetry reading in some cafe, and it was great. And it was that was the December 2012, and that was one of the first events of Idle No More in Edmonton. So I got to do this poetry reading. I was there for the first Idle No More. It was monumental for me, and I thought, like, that was it. That was great. This is great. We write poetry. We write poetry. This is wonderful. And then when I won the GG, everything changed. Absolutely everything. Second printing, for one. I got invited to things. My entire career trajectory changed. And it is all about that award. And it was the same book 13 months later when I didn't win any Manitoba Book Awards. Wasn't even nominated for any Manitoba Book Awards. Where it was, the viewing of that book, the very same book, was very different in how it was received. So I think we're a very award-driven community. And I too, it's gravy. It's beautiful. It's amazing to have people read your work and think it is worthy of this. And these are all your peers who are on these juries. So it feels really awesome. But it's the same book, whether it happens or not. But the difference in the response is astronomical.
Will, what about you?
Well, Katherena and I have different trajectories, but I agree substantively with what she's saying, is that because I was in it a long time before I got any recognition from awards, but I was writing travel and getting travel assignments and whatnot. So I got the Giller in 2012. So you had just launched your book, but I had been doing it since '97. So Katherena's first book won the GG and raised your profile. I had been at it for a while, but I do agree with you that it is a strange feeling because the book is the same, but suddenly it's perceived differently. I mean, so 419 was the same novel before and after, but it's suddenly perceived differently. Yeah. And then your future books are perceived differently. Yes. If you write any humor, they're like, oh, he's going back to this, or if you write this, he's doing that. Or I wrote a travel book. The strangest thing I got a comment once. Actually, no, I won't go there. I just realized. But anyway, I agree. No, I just caught myself. Yeah. I agree with you though that it's wonderful. Like, you would be hard pressed to complain about it. It's fantastic. Yeah. It raises your profile and sales and all that. But for me, I'd been doing it for a long time, so it was very nice. But I'd been at it since '97, and so it's a different type of trajectory. And I started nonfiction, right? So I started writing political kind of humor.
Please tell us what the strangest comment was that you got. Well, please.
You're editing.
No.
I can hear you
No,
editing.
what I'm doing is I'm quickly trying to find a different anecdote that I could pull out. No, it would be mean-spirited to say it now in retrospect.
Okay.
It's one of those things you tell your spouse afterwards, a reaction that someone had, and then how they changed later, after an award, before an award, and after an award. But this is a very specific event that happened before and after. And it was funny because it was totally perception. It was just a perception because of an award.
Yeah. So it was an example of why his editor doesn't want him on social
Twitter.
media. Yeah. There you go.
Actually, I was thinking, I was technically on Twitter because in the early days, they had someone at the Publicity did it for me. They said, well, we'll do the Twitter. And I pulled the plug because one of the first tweets was, in Ottawa for the festival, so awesome. So it was this young intern had written it. I'm like, I've never used the word awesome in my life, not even ironically. So I said, no, please, no more Twitter tweets or twits or whatever. But that was one of my, so I think technically in some cache, and I have a Facebook account which I never use. I needed it because I was doing an event during COVID. They said, just give us your Facebook account. I said, well, I don't have one. So they set up, so there is a Facebook account, but I never look at it, so don't bother. But I had to send one up because there was some event that they did it through Facebook. So I've got a teenage son, so that's my he's often on the screen doing this. If you watch me on Zoom, if you watch it, you see my son go something. And when it's over, me going, and him going click. So he's usually hanging around going, Dad. But I remember my dad baffled by fax machines. Like, oh, and I'd have to come in and show him how to do a fax. And thinking, that poor old man, so out of it. And now my son's like, this is like, no, Dad, you have the mic on mute again. Dad, and click. I'm going. So anyway, but I agree with Katherena that it's great to see real people in real life. It's much, didn't Zoom exhaust you?
It was exhausting. I really liked the lack of commute. I really liked that. My first post-COVID event, I was late because I was like, oh crap, I have to drive there. I did not account for that time.
And you show up just wearing your pajama bottoms, nice hair in the pajama
I
bottoms.
have not gone back to non-elastic pants. No, I will not go back to non-elastic pants.
That's been a huge fashion shift,
Yes,
hasn't it?
yes. I think soft clothing is here to stay. Let's not go back to that.
I agree. Katherena, I wondered if I could direct a question to you. For myself as a disabled writer, I sometimes struggle to find a space between feeling obligated to develop deep relationships with my readers from those communities specifically. There's a real sense that I have of responsibility to represent my community in good and appropriate ways, but then also to ensure that readers from that community feel seen and cared for by me when they're interacting with me. And that can really take a toll. It takes a toll emotionally, it can take a toll just in terms of like your energy levels and that sort of thing, but also you want to keep going because people sometimes, especially when you're in person, have traveled to see you. And so that, it can be difficult sometimes to navigate that. And I wonder, how do you navigate that sense of responsibility for yourself?
Well, I do acknowledge it's a responsibility. I do think whenever, whether I want to or not, I am a representative of my nation, my Michif nation. And it's also, as an Indigenous person, we do regard ourselves. I mean, traditionally, not everybody, we're not monolith. But I mean, the teachings that I've been given is that that is our responsibility and that is our job. Just like it's our job to honor our ancestors and pave a way for our children. These are parts of our roles as human beings on this earth. This is part of the deal. So I do regard it as a responsibility and I do take that seriously. But I also want it to be known, and I make it known whenever I get a chance, that I am an artist and I'm an individual voice and I'm only one voice. Another person can write about the exact same demographic, the exact same neighborhood, the exact same city, the exact same everything as me, and will have a completely different interpretation. based on their own life experience. Like I always say, I write about the North End, and I find North Enders all over the world. Like I'm talking Melbourne, I found a North Ender, Melbourne, Australia, and I was recently in France, found a North Ender. Yeah. Also found someone from St. Rose de Lac, which if no one understands is a very, very small French community in Manitoba. And I found them in France. I was very excited. So I love that, but I also firmly understand and always reinforce this is my version of this neighborhood. It is completely different than any other community, any other individuals. So I mean, it's both of those things. I do feel a responsibility of getting things right. I do feel a responsibility of authenticity. I want to write complex characters who are intelligent and beautiful and strong and also complicated in whatever way they're complicated. And part of that duty is because if I don't, the aunties will beat me up. So there's that. But it's also just, that's what I know. I write from that, and I write from for the people I love. I also I'm very conscious, I understand people are gonna read, but when I'm writing, I have to shut that off. Because one, I'm way too socially anxious, so if I think you're gonna read this, I'm gonna totally have a different, because I think writing, and you've talked about this a lot, about the solitary, the communal and stuff, but there's a point of writing that is incredibly solitary, and it is incredibly intimate. And it is me talking to me, but also people like me, and my relatives, and my community. And I find that that's the best writing. That's my favorite kind of writing. Whenever I find, I read widely. I say that sometimes I'm just, right now I'm really into self-help books, and there's nothing else but self-help books, so it's not very wide. But usually it's wide. And my favorite novels and fiction and poetry are the ones that I'm not being handheld. I'm not being explained things to. You don't need to handhold me through the nuances of your community. I have Google, I can figure it out. I want to know the intimacy of that. I want to know the truth in that. And you can't get that if you're trying to explain, which also kind of others yourself constantly, because there's a lot of writers who don't have to constantly explain their community and where they come from and who they come from, so so I do think there's a certain othering people do of themselves when they feel that they have to do that in order to gain more audience.
Thank you so much for that. We are approaching the end of time. I will open it up to questions after one more question of my own. So again, for those of you who were at the panel earlier in the morning, and those who are new, just stand up and raise your hand if you have a question. Maybe wave so that it's easier for me to see. And my last question before we get to that for the two of you is, what is the best thing that surprised you about being a writer in the public sphere? What has been the best unexpected thing for you in this part of the journey?
I'm sorry, can you?
What has been the best part about being a writer in the public sphere, about being able to...
On the public sphere, sorry, I didn't catch that. That was the phrase I didn't. Can I answer a different question?
Yes, absolutely.
I have a good answer, so. You sure?
Yes, go ahead.
It's been one. I meeting readers and seeing that there are real people out there. There are people out there buying and reading your book. Because without readers, none of it happens. None of it really happens. We're just in a room talking to ourselves. Because it's not a healthy way to make a living. You're in a room making up imaginary conversations between imaginary people. And then, so it's not a healthy way to live. So it's good to get out and see real people. But I wanted just to touch on something that we've talked about in relation to fans and it's a question that kind of bedevils authors or authors come back to, and that's, who are you writing for? Are you writing for yourself, or are you writing for the readers? And I wrestled with that for a long time, and it took me a long time to realize it's really two questions embedded. It's not one question, it's because there's what you write and then how you write. And I think what you write, the things that obsess you or fixate you or motivate you or drive you, that's for you. You write that for you. But how you write, you have to write to the reader. You have to write for the reader, I think. And how close the reader has to come to you depends where you want to set the line. Because I think what happens with authors is if what you write is for readers, that's it, you're writing what you write. You're really you're pandering to a market, I think, often. And you get that really high genre writing at that end, right? You get Harlequin romances, you get that. And early on, I was trying to do that. I was wrestling with that. With some of my nonfiction, I was like, what does the market tell me to write? And I was never happy with those books. And likewise, if how you write with fiction goes too far, it's what you touched on, there's no story there. It becomes too esoteric, too self-centered. So I think I always keep my readers in mind when I'm writing, but I don't keep them in mind when I come up with a story. Yeah. I think that's a story that I like, that I want to play with.
That's a great distinction between the two.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
It took a long time. I've been doing this a long time. It takes me years before I realize something. I'm very slow on the uptake.
I'm very slow too. Yeah. What was the question? The best part?
What's the best thing about, what's the best surprise that you've encountered with being a writer in the public arena?
There's so many, and there are good surprises and bad surprises. The one thing I'm thinking about this weekend is, okay, and this is related to my self-help stuff, is I'm really into meditation right now, just totally revealing myself to you. So I've been doing these guided meditations. In the beginning of the weekend, I did this guided meditation by this woman with a beautiful voice, and it was all about guided meditations. You're good, you're awesome, you're love. But she was saying something about the healing being an act of public service. And I love that. Like the fact that healing yourself is not selfish. It's actually a work of revolution. And it's also like healing yourself is healing your lineage. Damn, I never get emotional like this. So I need to slap on a joke so I don't cry. But healing yourself is healing your lineage. And it broke me. Oh my God, it broke me. And I love that. And it goes back to this t-shirt I remember seeing at a powwow somewhere. And it was like, you are your ancestors' dream come true. I mean, right? I write a lot about my grandmother. And I think a lot about my grandmother, and she's definitely here with me. She passed when I was 13, and she would fucking love this. She would just love that I get to do this, that I get to live this life, that I get to be up here having this job, And that is my favorite thing about my job this weekend, because damn, she's having a good time.
Thank you both so much for your wonderful answers and this thoughtful, wonderful conversation, really, in so many ways. I'm so grateful. Do we have a question or two? Does not look like it. Oh, yes.
This could go either way. This is like a throwing a dice.
She's very kind.
Okay.
I don't know if authors sometimes realize how elevated the readers put them. And so sometimes we don't think you're real. And so when you're real, it's a big surprise. And I think it's wonderful that you're real and willing to interact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good comment.
That's a good
Good
comment.
comment.
That was a
I
good one.
accept that. Yeah.
That was a good one.
In the back there? Yep.
Well, I'd like to invite you to our book club.
So, but,
She'll feed you.
will you
feed
feed
you.
me? If
Yeah.
you feed me, I will come.
Oh, yep.
So, sometimes when you're writing, it's agonizing and it's incredibly exasperating. You're working on each word and the reception isn't what you want. But there's no such thing as perfection, and eventually you just have to be done, and you have to let it go. And
Anyone go?
You'll probably agree, is that often there's a point when you're writing a book. I always think the publishers, and the book tours have kind of died. Like when I started, they would send you on these tours, but with the internet and everything. But I used to think they sent you on book tours to keep you humble. You think you're something special? Go to a signing in that bookstore. Let's see how special you feel you are. But I find, the one thing I find is that you often get kind of not tired of the book, but you're tired of it. And the oddest thing is people who've just read the book, it's fresh. So they always look, did you really write that? Because they'll mention something, oh yeah, I said that. So it's much more fresh in their mind. And especially as the books go on, and they'll reference a book, someone's come in, How to Be a Canadian with Your Brother, you wrote. I'm like, I don't remember that. That was like 20 years ago, so I don't remember. So, but I'm always appreciative. I try not to, I don't get really upset with that. I just find it interesting that often the readers know the book better than I do, because it's fresh, they've just read it. And sometimes they're more engaged with the novel than I am at the end of it, because you get kind of tired of a book at the end, don't you? Don't you find you get kind of tired of it at a certain point? No?
Well, I hope not, because
It's just me then. It's just me.
I mean, it's tiresome, but I like endings and beginnings. It's the middle where I'm like, come on, make something happen. I end up talking a lot about trauma and racism, so I do love to imagine a world where I don't have to do that, and I don't have to write about that, one day. But because I choose to write about what those are the people that have hit, racism and intergenerational trauma are the things I have to write about in order to accurately write about this experience that I'm in. So that can get tiresome, because it's exhausting to talk about, the effect that racism has had on your family for generations. But I don't tire talking to people about things. And I also as much as it's exhausting to me at the end of the day when I'm like, whew, I cannot talk about trauma for another minute. But I actually love talking about, I get really into these conversations, and I love talking about people I've made up in my head that other people have connected to. Oh my goodness. Yes, let's talk about my imaginary friends. This is my 8-year-old dream come true. Me as an 8-year-old. So I don't tire of that. And I also this is this world today, and I'm about to get into a vehicle. I'm going to be by myself for 6 hours, singing Kelly Clarkson songs. Just kidding, I'm not going to sing Kelly Clarkson songs. Just I am. But so I get to refresh, So this is actually really, really fun. But I have to balance that out with being by myself so I can write again.
Well, thank you both so much for your generous answers and your just generosity of spirit in being here with us today. Thank you all so much, audience, for joining us for this last panel. And I believe I will turn it over now to the wonderful Sarah and wonderful Amanda, who have done so much work along with the interns and everybody else here this weekend to bring the festival. A round of applause for these superheroes.
Thank you, Amanda and Will and Katherena. It was a lovely panel, and thank you to everyone. We made it. We're at the end. Can you believe it? I feel like Thursday was a week ago and also yesterday. So thank you again for celebrating 26 years with the festival. Just because the summer festival is over doesn't mean you have to wait until next year to participate. The Saskatchewan Festival of Words has year-round programming, including our Performers Cafe open mic night, with the next one at the end of August, and Cinefew film series starting up again in September. More programs will be announced in the coming months, so watch for details. And in the festival newsletter, website, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as well as local news sources. So now for the part you're all waiting for, the draws. So our first draw is for the individual session ticket evaluations for a small basket of books valued at $100. And the winner is D. Sikora. Are they here today, or are they picking it up later? Yay! You can pick that out at the front. Our next raffle is for the wristband draw for a medium basket of books valued at $200. And the winner is... Oh, wait, I dropped it. Oh, other side. Barry Tisdale. Hey! And our last door prize draw is for the full and flex evaluation forms. It's a prize of $300 in books. This is the one everyone's buying for. And the winner is, oh my goodness, it's Jerry Haig. So lastly, we have our lovely limited edition prints. So we're giving away 4 limited edition prints that you can pick up at the front. And our first winner
Has a phone number.
is
There's
it's Kim Orenick. Congratulations, Kim. Then we have Judy Voth. Jean McElrath. Do another one. Do another.
Oh, I put it back in. Hang on, there we go.
Okay, there we go. And Julie Coburn. And I will pass it over to Sarah for final remarks.
We're excited to announce that the 2023 festival will feature 2 of the authors that we're very sad to have had to cancel this year, so they're going to come back next year. Michelle Good and Paul Hubner will be back next year. We're also going to have fiction author Bradley Sommer and fantasy writer Guy Gavriel Kay. Before I let you go, a huge thanks again to our funders, without which none of this would be possible. Sask Arts, Canada Council for the Arts, Government of Canada, Sask Culture, Saskatchewan Lotteries, the City of Moose Jaw, the Barry and Dee Dee Wigmore Foundation, and of course our program funders and sponsors. Don't you have that list memorized yet? Next year I'm going to make you say it back to me. Thanks also to our team of tireless volunteers and, of course, our highly dedicated and supportive board of directors, Glenda Julian, Meredith Hagel, Jean McElrath, Carrie Hennepin, and Ash Hennepin. And sincere thanks to outgoing board members, Jean Surratt and Dave Pelche. Last but not least, yeah, thank you, that's great. They put in a lot of time. Last but not least, Amanda Leduc already kind of did this for me, but our summer interns, Emily Pinter and Daniel McElroy, and operations manager, Amanda Farnell. So Emily and Daniel, thank you. Hope you enjoyed the festival this year. You seem to have. I've been getting lots of great comments. So thanks again to all of our authors and Amanda Leduc for taking on so much work this year. 2022, that's a wrap. Hope you're able to come back next year and mark your calendars, July 13th to 16th for 2023. Safe travels home.